Hello, I'm Grace Colton, a member of East Shore Unitarian Church. This is the third video of the Widening the Circle of Concern series at East Shore. The series is a way to deepen your understanding of the work of anti-racism within our own congregation, other Unitarian Universalist congregations, and the Unitarian Universalist Association. This video and the pre-reading prepare you to consider how you can apply its learnings to yourself and your understanding of East Shore. You read in the pre-workshop reading that Widening the Circle of Concern is a report put out by the Unitarian Universalist Association's Commission on Institutional Change. That they put it out in June of 2020. Anyone attending the 2020 General Assembly, as I did, heard about the Widening the Circle of Concern report. It was widespread. I found it to be amazing, challenging, and stunning. This video covers the Congregations and Communities section, one of 10 sections. Each of the 10 sections identifies systemic issues that will take long-term, steady work to address by the UUA congregations, East Shore, our teams, committees, board, and task forces, staff, ministry, and each of us individually, because we are East Shore. If we don't change individually, East Shore won't change. The Widening the Circle of Concern report describes the larger context that UU churches are in and what Black, Indigenous people of color as a group within our faith are experiencing while they are in our faith. The report gives context for Unitarian Universalism's racism and white culture, explains the present, and offers what we need to do for the future to be more anti-racist and anti-oppressive. From a broader perspective, the report says we need to become more anti-racist and anti-oppressive in order for our faiths to stay alive and grow. Anti-racism and anti-oppression work is needed for our survival. The pre-workshop reading laid out the trends that support that conclusion. The report's recommendations have been formally adopted by the UUA Board of Trustees as a kind of blueprint for them to follow. It first came out at the General Assembly in 2020, where sessions went over the content. There was followed articles, a blog. The UUA.org has established a whole section on the report. An implementation guide has been written for congregations. The Pacific Western region of the UUA established an award for 2021 for Widening the Circle of Concern. The first award was granted to the Mountaintop, a Unitarian Universalist Black, Indigenous people of color group in Colorado. At the 2021 General Assembly last June, the UUA president announced 3 priorities for this year. One is to start implementing the recommendations of the Commission's report, which will be a multi-year effort. The report's recommendations include curating resources, creating learning circles, and funding for tools to include anti-oppression tools, conflict facilitation and leadership development, and better communication between the UUA and East Shore. Congregations can ask for and expect the Unitarian Universalist Association to respond. East Shore adopted the 8th principle last June and has a board goal of acting on our commitment to the 8th principle and an active 8th principle ministry team. And there are resources each of us can use to come to understanding, acceptance, and eventually action to make East Shore more anti-racist and anti-oppression in thought, word, and deed. This presentation will present the range of issues specific to our congregations and communities brought up by the report for East Shore to consider when trying to become more anti-racist and anti-oppressive. You personally might find insightful, challenging, and amazing perspectives in the report. It would be common for reactions to the report to be along a range, maybe sad or afraid or offended, or just not getting it. Or if I might find information in the report helps you understand something to the point where you say, yes, I know what that is, or I've experienced or witnessed that happen. If you think you feel nothing as you go through this video, consider that our feelings tend to show up first in our bodies. So notice and write down what you hear that makes your body react. What makes you stiffen or gasp or hold your breath? Grip your hand. Does your heart beat faster or your mind go blank? Note where your reaction happens as you go through the video. You can go back later if you need to figure out what got to you and why. Remember, the report calls for change in our congregations, which means we have to change ourselves and change individually. What individual work is there for you to do? Pause this video right now if you need to get something to write down notes with. Here is the outline of the video of our time together. I will do an introduction, a short meditation. Then I'll go into the summary of the background and trends that were in the report for congregations and communities. We'll have a quick body break, and then I'll review the recommended practices for congregations and communities, the takeaways, have some closing words and a reflection. Let's do a very simple 1-minute grounding meditation of breathing for about a minute to leave behind our day and get centered, to make a transition from our day to being open to receiving a perspective that may be quite different from our own. Just breathe in and out. Breathe out longer than it takes for you to breathe in. Get a comfortable body position. Close your eyes if you'd like to. And I'll start counting, but then fade out to set our pace. And I'll let you know when the minute is over. 3, 6, 2, 3. Last one. There you go. Join me in lighting a chalice with words from Work in Commitment and Love by Viola Abbott from the UUA Worship Web. As we light this chalice, may it serve to give us clarity of purpose and illuminate our way as we set about doing the work of this congregation in commitment, in cooperation, and in love. I'd also like to offer 2 quotes from the report that foreshadow a story that I'll be telling. The first quote is from James Luther Adams. It's attributed to him. He was an influential Unitarian Universalist theologian. He's quoted as saying, "Church is a place where you get to practice what it means to be human." The second quote is from Octavia Butler. She was a science fiction writer, and she wrote in her book, Fledgling, "When your rage is choking you, it is best to say nothing." Widening the Circle of Concern has composite stories. I'm going to read one of them. The commission created 5 stories they called avatars in the report. The term avatar comes from Hinduism, meaning the incarnation of a deity. Its use in the report can be considered a misappropriation, so I haven't used the term. The stories represent themes that had strong and consistent patterns in the commission's research. They are composites of the testimonies that were submitted and also those that came out of the focus groups done in 2017 and 2018. In this way, the commission could amplify themes in the testimony without endangering an individual's livelihood or community connection. Note that so many people said that they felt endangered by allowing the commission to use their names, that the commission couldn't get enough interviews without anonymity. And these were interviews they're asking of BIPOC Unitarian Universalists. This composite is a letter written by fictional Mallory Ramish, board member of a congregation. She's about 35 years old, Indian, queer, and a social activist. She writes, I joined my local Unitarian Universalist church after meeting some UUs at a Black Lives Matter rally after a local unarmed Black man was killed. The UUs I met were members of a church in a nearby city. So I did some online research and picked my home church because they had information about becoming a welcoming congregation on their website. I'll note here that Mallory seemed to be attracted to our values and found a UU church on her own. After a couple of months of attending the service and book club, Mallory writes, the minister asked me to join the board. I thought this was kind of rushed. At the book club, I'd noticed that whenever any question about people of color came up, I was the one everybody turned to look at. I'm Indian. It was funny considering that my suggestion that we add pronouns to our name tags was dismissed by the woman heading the LGBTQ council, even though I'm also queer. I thought I could do some good as a board member, so I agreed. Despite reluctance by some established church leaders, we participated in the white supremacy teach-in. What Mallory's referring to here is that in the spring of 2017, about 2/3 of Unitarian Universalist congregations responded to a UUA call for a worship service that taught about racism and white supremacy. Mallory continues. Though even then, our involvement was limited to a single service and reflection. At the following board meeting, I inquired about how we planned to implement the recommendations from the teach-in, adopting the 8th principle and doing a church-wide racism audit. Our outgoing settled minister shut down the conversation and suggested that it would be more appropriate to bring up the issue with our interim minister. When I did so at the following meeting, the interim minister said she wanted to wait until she'd gotten to know the congregation. The next month, our interim said again that she wanted more time. At the following meeting, the issue was pushed to the end of the agenda, and when another issue turned into a long discussion, the majority of the board members decided it was too late to discuss anything else and voted to table the meeting. Leading up to the next meeting, I wrote 2 emails to our board secretary asking for the issue to be placed on the meeting agenda. Both emails were ignored before they finally responded to the third. At the meeting, I decided to bring up my concerns with how the recommendations had been handled, especially considering that the adoption of a practice regarding environmental justice had passed easily and with no similar delays. The board secretary, a white woman, immediately centered herself and her own discomfort, framing the situation as an attack on herself by me. The issue was left unresolved at the end of the meeting. It was extremely uncomfortable for me. During this period, my relationship with the board members in question soured, and several church members engaged in a whisper campaign against me, seemingly targeting my social justice views, with one member joking that I had issued a fatwa against mentioning US presidents in sermons after I'd related complaints about an Independence Day reflection. Unwilling to encounter this on Sunday mornings, I stopped attending. Though I finished my board term, I missed meetings, I dropped out of the book club, and no longer attended anything at the congregation. Mallory's story is a composite of common themes heard by the commission. You can look for connections between Mallory's story, the quotes I offered during the reflection, and the background and trends for congregations and communities that I'll go through next. Pause the video if you need more time to think. This is a summary of the congregations and communities' backgrounds and trends. I used annotated words for the report in this section. When I'm not using the report's words, I will let you know. The first point that the report makes about congregations and communities is that many of our congregations are in trouble with dwindling membership participation and financial contributions. My note here is that it's commonly said we have 1,000 congregations. We really have 819 who meet the standards for a congregation today, according to the report. The report continues, a factor that contributes to this decline is our inability to address issues of inclusion, equity, and diversity. The Commission makes two assertions. First, that real-time, face-to-face congregations matter, even with all the challenges to maintain them, and in time when church-going is less valued by many in younger generations. Face-to-face experiences, which are much more accessible, especially for those with limited technological skills and financial resources. Second, and this is an and, not an or, that we will also need to support alternative and often virtual communities in order to ensure the survival of communal associations, especially for younger Unitarian Universalists of color and those living in areas where less mainstream identities are less common. The theological and overall trends section of the report, summarized in the pre-reading, also talk about the challenges of our changing church world. The second item in this list is that reports continue to indicate that multicultural congregations are on the rise and that progressive-minded working-age adults expect the basic practices of equity, inclusion, and diversity that many of our congregations currently lack. If you look in the notes section of the report for data sources and overall trends summarized in the pre-reading, you will see the evidence for this. And the testimonials collected show that congregations may not know about the experiences that people of color have within their walls, because Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color have experienced a lack of safety when honest in their congregations. The Commission went through 650 pages of transcripts and more than 80 hours of audio-video interviews to reach this conclusion. An example of a focus group's participants' comments is, quote, "I wish more of my people looked like me," presumably referring to her congregation or his congregation or their congregation. "For that reason, I fear that I may always feel a little bit like an outsider. I will explain it to you in the following way. It is quite obvious to me that the UU setting is a sanctuary for gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual people. It is not as obvious that it is for people of color." Number 4, not only are congregational leaders asked to take on change, never popular among established groups, take on change around one of the most trickiest subjects in the United States culture, racial tensions, but we have also asked them to do it without the consistent support of our association, the UUA. This is important because of the way our expectations are changing. As this focus group participant shared, we've gone from focusing on diversity, just trying to get diverse people into the congregation, to inclusion, which is to find ways to welcome and include diverse people in our congregation, to a greater understanding that it's not enough to welcome people into our playgrounds, our congregation. We need to focus on racial equity and really, really seek out the voices of those who have not been present in our congregation. People from marginalized groups, especially in terms of race, and really begin to co-create with people from these marginalized groups to create a new kind of culture. My note here is that 2 years of focus group work were done with General Assembly, regional and districts, professional associations, and online in order for the Commission to reach this conclusion. All right, we'll go for a bit of a body break. You can pause the video here. I will pause for a little bit and then continue. As the last item on the previous slide said, institutional change is inherently problematic since institutions exist to preserve traditions and customs. How are we to change ourselves? The Commission identified several areas for focus to help us accept change that would also help our congregations to survive into the future, benefiting all. Their first idea is that the culture of many congregations is not keeping pace with the expectations of new generations for anti-oppressive practices. The Commission identified several areas for focus to help us accept change that would also help our congregations to survive into the future, benefiting all. The first area of focus is the culture of many congregations is not keeping pace with the expectations of new generations for anti-oppression practices. The Commission believes that for Unitarian Universalism to survive as a faith movement, we must have reform at the congregational level. This will be some of our hardest work. Longtime congregational leaders may not see the ways that a changing world is asking that Unitarian Universalism be accountable to all the diversity of people in our congregations and communities. It is urgent that we recognize that those among the newer generations and marginalized identities represented in Unitarian Universalism have begun to lose hope that our congregations will ever choose to change. These communities and individuals are therefore less willing to continue to give of their time, energy, resources, and emotional labor in order to do the work of teaching and leading for internal justice at the congregational level. Remember the earlier quote that I offered to you. When your rage is choking you, it is best to say nothing. Because of the historical expansion of UU religious expression, goes the report, followed by the eventual neglect of theological work within the UUA in the 20th century, our congregations often have the characteristics of elite social clubs rather than of religious institutions. As a religious institution and not a social club, we are bound in covenant to a set of beliefs and aspirations. Our inclusive pluralist principles allow individuals to find their own paths to truth within our Unitarian Universalist frame, yet often individuals do not see that our faith community is held together by a set of common communal values. When individualism is not in balance with communal good, individualism can become toxic to our religious community. If we wish to preserve Unitarian Universalist and Unitarian Universalist traditions, our conversations and research suggest that our congregations must center themselves in the communal and covenantal, and not primarily the comfort and familiarity of the social club. This change must be accomplished with some speed and agility, recommends the Commission. An example of the tensions are seen in this submitted testimony. Quote, how are we going to become more diverse, assuming that diverse means racially diverse, unless we commit ourselves to acting against racism? So it seems to me there's a disconnect there. And that might be a way of expressing that disconnect and therefore the struggle, so that it's easier for someone to say, yeah, I want to diversify as long as I don't have to actually do anything to change myself, as long as the congregation doesn't have to change. And I suspect that's kind of a struggle that a lot of people are going through, unquote. Now I'd like to play for you a segment of a video that is from the 2016 closing ceremony of General Assembly. Leslie Mack, who is a leader of the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalist Affinity Group, and in this video, she calls to all UUs to connect the disconnect that exists in Unitarian Universalism by asking the question, how can faith be transformed?
Assembly 2016 for me, like life, has been a lesson in contradictions. This actually makes perfect sense because our faith is a lesson in contradictions, right? We see contradictions in the wave of Black Lives Matter banners being hung in our congregations around the country, and yet, in truth, many Black UUs feel unwelcome in our pews. We see contradiction in the historic Black Lives of UU collection yesterday, and this whole hall proclaiming Black Lives Matter, and yet this body delivered a no vote for divestment this week. We see this in a GA planning committee who wholeheartedly supported our request for an explicitly Black healing space, and yet the need for that space exists at all amongst our people. My friends, there's a disconnect. I said there is a disconnect. And we need to get it together. We must be transformed. There's a disconnect between the work we want to do and the way we go about doing it, between our principles and our actions, between our words and our deeds. And we really need to get it together. We must be transformed. Over the last few years, so many white UUs have come up to me and said, Leslie Mack, how can we show up for Black lives? My response is always the same. I say, well, it's really simple. You just show up, and then you show up again, and again, and again, and you keep doing it until it becomes a habit for you in your life. Until the effects of your words and actions on communities of color become something you think about before you say and do them and not after. Until including Black voices in your search for truth become as comfortable as the white voices that you're used to. Until the spiritual lives of Black people in your communities are considered in every single decision you make as a congregation. This brings us to the question that looms large for us as a people of faith. In the face of a global movement demanding action towards Black liberation, how can we be transformed? How can our faith be transformed? This work towards collective liberation is more than just about outcomes. How we do this work is also how we create the world that we want to see. The second principle of Black Lives says love and self-love is practiced in every element of everything that we do. Love must be the driver of our work and an indicator of its successes. Without this principle and without healing, we will harm each other and undermine the movement we're building together. So we can no longer cause emotional harm to people of color as we did at last year's Black Lives Matter AIW in the Assembly Hall, and then return to General Assembly 12 months later to claim that action as victory. We can no longer do things the way they've always been done and then ask why change is taking so long. Quite frankly, my friends, we can no longer fail to take collective action as a faith and still call ourselves a movement at all. If we as a faith are truly committed to transformation, then I say to you, change must come to Unitarian Universalism. The way we have always done things must change. The way we seek connection must change. The way we move in the world must change. The way we worship must change. The way we breathe must change. So I ask you today, if you are personally committed to Black liberation, do you consistently live that out? If your congregation is committed to Black liberation, does it consistently make decisions in alignment with that commitment? And if our faith is truly committed to Black liberation, are we finally ready to consistently challenge the long-held systemic practices that do not live up to that commitment? Only when we are able to answer those questions with a definitive yes will we truly be collectively transformed into the faith that we claim to be, into a faith we strive to be, into a faith that lives up to our principled belief in the dignity and worth of all people. Let us make that commitment to be consistent in our lives, in our congregations, and in our faith, to say unapologetically with actions and not just words that Black lives, they matter here. Thank you and blessed be.
The next area of focus is that the Unitarian Universalist Association member congregations must act both as independent bodies and in coordination, covenant, and communion with other congregations. The UUA serves a central role as the facilitator of this communion. Miscommunication, distrust, or lack of understanding between the congregations and the UUA inhibits needed growth and transformation in our faith. Congregations are disconnected from the issues and resources of the association. Many leaders told the commission that their congregation did not feel connected to the association or aware of what is happening. Communications from the association have historically been funneled through a very narrow spectrum of congregational positions, predominantly presidents and ministers, and may not get communicated to all members of a congregation. Associational work to prepare congregations for today's needs can be ignored or invisible. Since the last associational effort to enhance cultural competency and to reduce oppressive practices, known as the Journey Toward Wholeness, since that was defunded, congregations and communities that wish to participate in efforts towards inclusion, equity, and diversity often do so on their own. Those congregations engaged in this work do have curated resources and support the sharing, but operate without any UUA support. Next bullet. Congregations lack a covenantal understanding with one another and with the association, which is critical to the effectiveness of congregational polity. The governance and theology sections of the report also touch on this, but it relates to congregations' communities in the following way. Congregational leaders may use the idea of congregational polity to maintain an organizational independence that discourages them from joining with other congregations in the work of equity and justice. Congregations may not see a duty toward the association as a whole, especially when the association is acting as a change agent. The association and the congregations themselves have become overly dependent on the need for overwhelming consent of all members, or at least all current acknowledged and vocal congregational leaders, before beginning to undertake any faith work. However, we must recognize that congregational polity calls for our association and congregations to heed all voices, including new members and minority members, as sources of wisdom, direction, and faithfulness. In addition, we misinterpret what congregational polity means. So often we talk about congregational polity and covenant as structures of organization and management for our movement, as if they are only our business model. However, our polity and covenantal agreements enable us to come together in ways that honor the sacredness of our gathered communities. They speak to who we are and how we are to be when we are together. Congregational polity says that each of us as individuals makes up the shared body that is our community of faith. Each of us is an equal and needed partner in our living tradition. Each of us is responsible and accountable for the future of our faith. This misinterpretation that congregational polity and covenant are structures of organization and management that are only our business model has led to a culture of critique, which makes change processes tedious and often unwieldy. Here's another video segment for you to watch. It's from the Congregation of the Larger Fellowship. They have a program called the Views of Unitarian Universalism. And this episode is called Crucial Conversations in Covenanted Community. It was recorded on December 5th, 2019, and has the Reverend Matthew Johnson, Aisha Hauser, Reverend Jessica Starrockers, Julica Herman de la Fuente, and Christina Rivera in it.
One thought about that, and this goes back to something you were saying earlier, Christina, so we have a covenant so that we can have crucial conversations. those crucial conversations help us get free of ways of thinking and acting that do not serve the holy, do not serve love, do not respect people. We get free because, and the conversations, the covenant is the container for that. We get free for what? For what purpose are we free? To enter a deeper covenant with each other and be in authentic, real relationships. The purpose of being human is to love one another and the world fully. That is its own kind of covenant. So I wonder if there's a circle here between the covenant that allows us to get free and the covenant we can come to at a deeper and truer level once we are more free. And then you just keep going, right? Because we're never finished. We're never finished.
Well, we have to stop harm. I think we have to stop harm. There's a
Mhm.
lot of harm happening because people aren't free, and the tangible, what the horrific tangible violence that is happening is what needs to stop. And at some, I mean, the idea that I still have to defend the words Black Lives Matter, still 2019, in our UU congregations means what is going to get us free, and what does free mean is let's first stop the harm, stop the harm, stop the harm. So I just want to say.
Well, and I want to say too that I think part of that process is that we are an emerging tradition. Like revelation is supposedly, right, like always presenting itself. We need to get free so that we can live out what our tradition is calling us to be. We can't know what is being revealed until we get free, and then we see what is being revealed, and then we continue the process and reevaluate our covenants. And I mean, what is being revealed right now for sure, Aisha, is that we need to stop harm. Like, that to me is clear. And that there are some folks who are in their bodies experiencing trauma in a way that I, in my body, cannot understand. And I need to listen and see what is being revealed in that way.
Yeah, I would like to underline that, both in my current position in the UUMA and before, when I was administrative support to the Commission on Institutional Change. I just want to name that some of our religious professionals are asked to serve our faith in ways that are just unbelievably intense and threatening on the regular. And that is not okay. That needs to stop. And we need to hold each other accountable. And accountability is part of getting free. And covenant is part of how we hold each other accountable. And accountability is not a bad word. I get really fierce about that. So I'm going to mute myself right now.
Years ago, I heard somebody say that the people who are best at covenant are folks in the BDSM community, because they are real clear about where the limit is and what the safe word is. And I think, our movement could do some good with some real clear safe words. So when we say ouch or stop, don't say that. The question isn't, well, why? Explain yourself. The question is, okay, you've said the safe word. Conversation is over. And I think part of our accountability procedures for the ministers that we're proposing, number one is stop the harm. If a right relations guide says, stop the harm, then you stop. That's it. We'll have a conversation later. But first, you guys stop hitting me.
Amen. Absolutely.
The next area of focus is that congregations need promising practices, including resources on caucusing to support oppressed and marginalized groups. In this context, caucus refers to identity-based space, a practice of Unitarian Universalist communities seeking to address the particular spiritual, community, and justice needs of specific identity groups. Examples include youth caucuses and young adult ministries, gender identity and sexual orientation, as well as racial identity caucusing. The report says, the Visions Report, which is a 2019 outside audit company report that reviewed key documents such as the UUA bylaws, and analyze leadership structures with a focus on systemic oppression. That visions report identified the importance of caucuses during this time of moving toward a more inclusive Unitarian Universalism, recommending that congregations and other groups within the UUA engage in supporting caucus groups for their own support and continued growth. These can be facilitated at the start to give participants an idea of how the groups should run to promote learning and growth. This process would also provide the opportunity for greater clarity around the use of these groups. That is, making sure that both personal and systemic work can occur through the process in these groups for white congregants and people of color congregants. Next bullet. As we work toward a congregational model that can serve generations with new practices around diversity and equity, we will need other community models to complement and support what is available in congregations. In a time in which people do not enter religious communities easily or instinctively, the Commission believes we need to have congregations more focused on promoting and providing opportunities to live our values. You might be wondering what other UU congregations do. Well, the report offers a case study of the First Parish of Malden, Massachusetts. They found that their congregation was losing members. Instead of continuing as it was, the congregation made a commitment to welcome younger and more diverse leadership and is now a thriving congregation with a young adult focus. Their mission, vision, and covenant of the members reflect this focus. There are some recommended congregational practices to increase equity, inclusion, and diversity. One is to appoint someone to be a liaison to the UUA. While many congregations may have trouble supporting a full denominational affairs committee or team in our environment, a point person can monitor and make sure leaders and publications have a representative. Another idea is to ensure that lifespan religious educators, that would be everybody who delivers adult education, religious education to youth, children, and adults. Make sure that all those educators are focused on building understanding about equity and inclusion. This includes providing significant opportunities for cross-cultural immersion through partnerships and also use of videos, films, and other online resources. Another idea is to do basic hospitality role-playing in education each year for those involved with membership and greeting activities, including greeting, membership, ushering, worship planning, refreshment serving, etc. Another idea is to put money in your budget for education around anti-oppression practices. Do that each year. The amount can be small, $500 to $1,500 to participate in a curriculum, pay a speaker's fee, or get a group subscription to an online course. And Eastshore has effectively done that this year with Beloved Conversations, scholarships for within and for everyone taking the Among, and is paying for everyone to take the Among course. Another idea is to add a line item for scholarships to General Assembly and make them available to those who most need to connect around identity. Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, LGBTQ folk, and young adults and youth all would be given scholarships. And this might be a new approach for Eastshore. We have paid for anybody who volunteered to be a delegate to go to General Assembly. But this item is suggesting that we pay for marginalized people and people of color to go so they can connect around their identity to a larger UU community. And the last bullet is to form a justice partnership with organizations led by those most affected by the issues and to follow their lead. This is especially important when working with organizations across lines of race and class. Eastshore has probably started to work on this in that we have existing partnerships, such as with the Khasi Hills in India. And we have new groups considering what connections they can develop. Indigenous connections and the Afghan refugees assistance efforts that the 8th Principal Ministry team is involved in. The takeaways for the congregations and communities section are congregations that choose to engage to increase equity, inclusion, and diversity are leading the way into the future. Too often, congregations must do this challenging work by themselves when learning communities would be easy to form. Curated resources, learning circles, and funding to develop needed tools should be a priority for the UUA-led efforts under the leadership of the Liberal Religious Educators Association. LREDA, as it's known, is the professional association for Unitarian Universalist religious educators. Anti-oppression tools, as well as conflict facilitation, are essential to leadership development efforts, and leadership development is needed in the complex and often conflictual context of leadership today. For example, a conflict resolution team for congregations is forming at the UUA. Core to the design of the team is a paid nationwide team of specialized coaches to help congregations engage conflict, covenant and recovenant, love boldly and faithfully. None of this can be accomplished without better communication between the UUA and the congregations it serves, as well as from East Shore to the UUA. We can have input to that relationship by engaging with the UUA. Regional gatherings could touch more Unitarian Universalists and help provide a common frame of reference. The Pacific West region is our region, and other regions' events are open to all UUA congregations. Regional staff should provide a consistent structure for work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are glimmers of that starting to happen, though there is a widening the circle of concern learning community being developed, and there are some other efforts in the works in direct response to the report. There is lots of food for thought in this as part of the report. Everything I've said in the video may seem like a daunting amount of change to embrace, and the report certainly acknowledges this is a long-term effort. There are more and specific recommendations and actions in the report that you can look up for East Shore to consider. There are more for you to find there. Many groups at East Shore might get ideas, actions, or material from the report to use in their efforts to address the board's goal of acting on our commitment to the 8th principle. Task force teams, committees, beloved conversations among the growth study group, ministerial search, and the board itself are all possibilities. Basically, the report argues we have internal work to do, individually and as a church. East Shore has adopted the 8th principle, indicating its support for becoming more anti-racist and oppressive. There are resources at East Shore for work on yourself. There's beloved conversation programs. East Shore's 8th principle team makes offerings to the community. We have developed a resource list for personal work if you're interested. The team can point you to resources that you need. The internet is a good resource for your own research. For working on the church, join teams and committees doing change work. You can partner with staff through conversation, letting them know what you wish would or could happen. And if a specific action in the report attracts you, approach a staff member or an East Shore committee or team about working on it. The 8th principle ministry team is an option for you, for a partner for you. I'll close with 2 offerings, a reflection and a prayer. The reflection refers to the history of Unitarian Universalism's work in anti-racism, anti-oppression. The prayer is for us to accept the tension inherent in this change work. The first reflection is from a part of the Widening the Circle of Concern report, 1989, a report titled, "We Have No Problem," again, from the Black Concerns Working Group, included the following words, quote, "that the white majority refusal to acknowledge and accept the firsthand knowledge that people of color, indigenous, and other marginalized groups face within our frames is maddening to those who experience it over and over among us," unquote. These words still resonate 3 decades later. This lack of regard and respect is what leads to an evolution from accusations of racial bias to racism to white supremacy culture. My second reflection is a prayer for Living in Tension by Joseph M. Cherry. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. Thank you.